nothing but a hound dog. You're crying all the time. You ain't nothing but a hound dog. Crying all the time.
I've been looking for a theme song for months for the All Creatures Veterinary Center Ask the Doc segment every Wednesday morning. I think you approve, Dr. Maryweather. You seem to. Well, it's like I was like, okay, what can I come up? Oh, hound dog, hound dog. And it, it talks about dogs, talks about rabbits, talks about crying, which a lot of dogs do when they have to come to the vet.
Especially if they're hound dogs.
Especially if they're hound dogs. That's true. And let me tell you, I have 2 of them, beagles, that do know how to cry. And I have one that when he's gotten better over the years because we got him as an adult, but I don't think he was ever walked or able to go out. And so he would see rabbits and squirrels, and he makes a noise that literally sounds like I'm picking him up and strangling him.
He's so excited.
It's so exciting. And like people literally, they look out of their over their fences and out the doors and stuff because they think that something happened. Because it's a scream. It's like this most horrible thing. And so, yeah, they tend to do that. And they also tend to like rabbits, but not in the way that maybe other people like rabbits as pets because they are bred to hunt. And so that is always the trick, is keeping them not only on the leash, but when they would wander.
Yeah, we see that a lot with terriers, too.
Terriers, yeah, and just those types of breeds that will go after. That's what they are. It's what they're born to do.
Working dogs.
So you can't be upset when they do that. And that has happened in a backyard where we used to live, where we were closer to the wilderness, and and catch him every now and then, much to my wife's dismay. And I'd have to tell her, you can't get mad at him because that's what he was born to. We'll just try to do whatever. But speaking of rabbits, not as prey, but as pets. And I think it's really important to understand, because of the fact that they are prey animals.
It is really important.
And as pets, they can make really good pets, but there are some things to think about, right? In preparing the home, and also in how much time you have to spend with them, and some things that really in consideration. Are you patient, right? You have to have some patience with your little bunny friends if you're going to have them as pets. Do you have a sense of humor? It makes me wonder if rabbits are really secretly, once you get to know them, if they're like Bugs Bunny or something. It's kind of interesting.
I think if you've ever been licked by a rabbit, they
really
have a sense of humor.
Oh my gosh. That just either sounds like the most cutest or most disgusting thing.
It's the cutest thing
in the world. By the way, Dr. Maryweather, if I didn't mention, is from All Creatures Veterinary Center, which is a 24-hour veterinary hospital here in Santa Clarita and on Lyons Avenue in Newhall. Right there in the Victorian buildings. A very nice place to go. And also associated with Canyon Country Veterinary Hospital, which is located on Soledad Canyon Road, right next to the Regal Cinema. So we got all the pleasantries out of the way, the official commercials. But also, does your schedule include plenty of time at home? Now, why is that so important if you're going to have a rabbit as a pet?
So I think rabbits, particularly rabbits, but kind of all exotics, definitely what you put into them is what you're going to get out. And that it's I think even more so of a hobby than maybe a lot of like the keeping of other creatures, and that there's a lot of very niche knowledge and information that you kind of have to learn.
Right.
And you either learn it ahead of time or you learn it through mistakes. So it's...
And I like this also. And what I'm doing is I'm seeing this kind of like rabbits as pets kind of article that I'm looking at. Are you comfortable spending a lot of time on the floor? So that seems really interesting, because obviously if you're going to put your rabbit down and you're pen them up, you're going to have to be there. And so if you are bad with crawling, if you have bad knees or a bad back, you have to take that into consideration, right?
Yeah, and the other thing is you'll see like bunny owners talking about like rabbit proofing their homes.
Right.
And that if you're going to have them loose, like you should definitely keep them supervised at all times, but there's a lot of things that they can get into very quickly.
Yes.
They can find trouble.
And they also like little toys too, right? Little things.
Yeah, they can. They like toys. They like chewing things a lot. Kind of eating. If you're a rabbit, it's kind of its own hobby. Like they should be eating 24/7.
Because they're always doing it. They're always moving their mouths. Like, I should put something in this, Now,
well, they have to constantly feed those microbes that keep them going. Otherwise, the microbes get unhappy.
When we talk about, what happens when the microbes get unhappy, for example?
So it's actually probably one of the most common emergencies I see with rabbits. In that, even if they've just stopped eating for a couple hours, like even, as little time as it takes you to go to work for the day and come back, the microbes, unless they're being constantly fed, they'll actually die.
Wow.
And then at that point, like their guts can stop. Like we call it ileus, but it's basically nothing's moving anymore, and it's like an urgent medical emergency at that point.
And these are things also if you were going to get a rabbit for your child and making sure that they understand the importance and care, and that you are there supervising their supervision
Directly
of their
every day.
So, and that's important. It's going to be your rabbit as much as it is theirs, and that also really important that rabbits need several hours of exercise. What I'm looking at here, like even up to like 30 to 40 hours a week of just kind of regular exercise, if they can get out from their cage, right? You don't just want to leave them in the cage all the time.
Yeah, I mean, it part of it kind of depends on your cage setup. I've seen some pretty elaborate setups, but most people, kind of your normal rabbit hutch, you need an area where they can kind of safely hop around.
And this is something too. No, we don't have very extreme temperatures here, although we might feel it this week with our bitter, chilly weather getting into the 50s. But we want to, well, and even still, and at night,
it's
here
much colder at night.
And we want to make sure that they are protected from those elements, correct? So it's not something you want to necessarily leave them outside.
Even the elements aside, we have coyotes who think rabbits are delicious.
Yes,
and it really, it's horrible. I mean, we lose cats.
Right.
And if your cat can't defend itself, the rabbits.
And even in a hutch, you have a coyote that's pretty
or
determined.
Raccoons at that point.
Right.
Raccoons, nothing is going to keep them out.
Right. They are wily. Those little fingers that they have with the claws. I'm telling
thumbs.
you, they are.
Worst idea ever.
I have a story about a raccoon problem we had several years back where we lived in a condo and had our cat food outside. And this mama raccoon and all 5 of her babies would climb up because we're wondering, my cat is so disgusting. How could she be leaving such a mess out here? Mama raccoon and her 5 little babies. So yeah, that they are very, very diligent. Yeah. And that's the thing of protecting your animal, which is a prey animal from being preyed upon.
And some things that people don't always think about, but the rabbits, they never get out of the prey mindset, so it doesn't, we always hear the cat doesn't bother the rabbit, the dog doesn't bother the rabbit. The cat and the dog can be perfectly behaved.
Right.
And the rabbit's still going to be like, oh my gosh, it's looking at me.
Right. And that's the thing
they
also,
never, it's an instinct that you never overcome.
And they are not cuddly creatures either because of that, right? They will,
I think that depends. I think definitely, if you handle your pet rabbit regularly, a lot of them are actually really social.
Okay. That's interesting
to know.
But
if you're not a cat or a dog,
Right. As long as something that they're not, they might have a concern, you might eat them.
Yeah.
We are speaking with Dr. Maryweather from All Creatures Veterinary Center located on Lyons Avenue, 24/7 operation. And she just got off work. So thank you for stopping by. Now we're going to come back and talk about snakes after this, but we got to take a break and get to some traffic. So this is your hometown station, AM 1220 KHTS.
Why not
just nothing but a hound dog, crying all the time. You ain't nothing but a hound dog.
And we're back with our segment, Ask the Doc, All Creatures Veterinary Center. Hound dogs, other kind of dogs, wolfhounds, rabbits, snakes, lizards, but not
bears.
But not bears or goldfish. Yes, and we talk about exotics, and we are here with Dr. Maryweather, who has I'd say a focus at least. If you have an exotic,
interest.
If you have a special interest, if you have an exotic pet, she's the one to come see at All Creatures Veterinary Center, located on Lyons Avenue in Newhall. 24/7 operation, by the way, and you usually are the night shift type person. So after hours.
Yep.
When Spot or Fluffy or Bugs the rabbit or whoever might have some issues, you'd be the one to see. But really important to talk about. We talked about rabbits earlier and really kind of dove into what they are like to have as a pet and what owners should consider. When we talk about the other exotic snakes, because we have a lot of people who like them, and it doesn't seem like we always see people in the circus or Alice Cooper who likes snakes. I met him once and he had a snake with him, but there are some things really to consider about snakes as well, right?
Yep.
Number one, it's probably a long-term commitment. They can live quite a while.
They can live a long time. Yeah.
So rabbits are usually maybe 7 to 10 years, a good healthy rabbit. And guinea pigs and hamsters a lot less. But when we talk about snakes and birds especially, they are long. Yeah. This is it. You are in a long-term relationship. Whether you want it or not, and so
let's hope you want it if you get them.
Well, yeah, because then what do it's really tough to. It's not as easy to. I don't know how many snake adoption centers there are out there, like there are dogs and cats.
There's a few reptile type
Right.
rescue places. But it's definitely something to do your research ahead of time.
And that's the thing, and be willing to feed prey animals to the
And
snake.
often live ones.
And that's the thing,
depending on the
because
snake.
and that's you can feed them frozen, but they prefer as they say, pre-killed
Yeah.
small prey, and that's really important. You have to be able to handle that and understand that that's a part of their nature. And so, if you are very, very squeamish or just can't do it, that's something you got to really consider. Most snakes, not all snakes, right?
Not all snakes. Most of the ones you're going to find being like readily available and legal to own. Definitely. And sometimes it depends on the species. It depends on the individual about whether or not they'll require live prey. But I would usually say if you're getting one, it's a consideration you'll have to take.
But live prey, can that also include insects for certain?
Yeah, depending on the species.
It's not always, there's
for
little
sure.
adorable little mice or anything like that.
Or baby mice.
Or baby mice. Oh my goodness. That had, so for one story, I had a friend of mine who did have kind of, I'm not sure if it was a python, but it was one of those bigger snakes, and actually did that where he had put the little mice in there, little mouse in there, and like, he usually just doesn't pay attention to it, and like several hours later, the mouse and the snake were curled up asleep together. I don't know if the snake probably got it later on, but even still, they had that moment, their magic moment, at least for a little while.
It's actually a good point to point out that, especially like if your snake or reptile isn't feeling well, it can actually be dangerous to leave their live prey items in there with them,
right?
Because they'll chew on your pet.
Oh, really?
And they even crickets, even crickets will chew on a reptile that's not feeling well and not moving so much.
It's just payback. I could see.
Yeah, or they're like, oh, this is a food item.
Yes. Oh.
It's quite the circle of life there. But yeah,
That's
but
right.
they can do some major damage, and so it's important. I usually recommend feeding outside of the usual habitat,
Right. Okay.
not just so that their mice aren't chewing on them in the middle of the night, but
Not
also so that
necessarily
when
at
you
the-
put your hands in the cage,
Right.
you don't necessarily want them to be like, oh, food's coming.
Yoink. Yes. And also, of course, they can be very adept escape artists, right?
Yeah, and snakes are notorious.
And even like doing something cleaning the cage or leaving anything open, they can get out. And usually it seems like they seem to head toward the warm places if it's a situation where they're trying to hide from someone. Is that usually the deal?
Yeah,
or?
that, sometimes even just not having the lid to the tank, because it's usually like an aquarium.
Right.
Or a terrarium. Even sometimes if the lid's not heavy enough, they can actually
They're crafty. You wouldn't think they have no arms and no legs. How can they do it? But they are.
They're like one big long tube of muscle.
That's right.
So they.
And let's talk a little bit about thermal gradient and making sure that, from a temperature control, because they are cold-blooded species.
Yep.
So they have to regulate their body temperature from outside sources. It's not like us where we're at a standard 98.6 degrees or any of your other mammal type pets, right?
Yeah. It's actually kind of like behavioral management of temperature. Like they will choose where to be based off of temperature.
And is it better still to have just a nominal room temperature type thing, or should you set it up?
I usually recommend having, it's like a lot of terrariums will have like a temperature strip in them. I actually usually recommend getting like a hand thermometer and usually also like a humidity gauge where you can actually put it in different places in the cage or in the tank and actually measure and making sure that you have the correct temperature gradient and that there's not, that the basking spot isn't too hot or that it's not too cold, and that, the cold part of the cage isn't so cold they'll never go over there.
Right. And that's important because you want to make sure.
And a lot of it's species specific, so you have to look up.
Now, what is it about the first time, if you've never experienced your snake shedding, which they shed their skin, usually is like once a year or every now and then they do. Are there behavioral things that you have to look out for when they're going to do that? Or what is it that, because I'm looking at this little piece of information on snakes, it's like, you may be in for a surprise the first time they shed. So is there something to that?
Yes and no. I think a lot of it depends also on how often you're handling your snake, whether or not you'll notice. Like some people report different things, usually a slight decrease in appetite. Usually they might be a little bit more agitated. A lot of it's going to depend. There's kind of normal things to look for, but then a lot of it's individual.
I see.
And time of the year as well.
Well, that's terrific to know, and especially if you're considering getting a pet for yourself. Don't necessarily get one for someone else for the holidays, especially when it comes to exotics.
Take them with you.
Do your research. talk to Dr. Maryweather. You have questions and just make sure that you know what you're getting into. Dr. Maryweather, always a pleasure. Our Ask the
Glad to
Doc
be here.
segment. All Creatures Veterinary Center, located on Lyons Avenue, the Victorian buildings between Newhall Avenue and Main Street. They're a 24/7 operation, but if you're on this side of town and during what would be considered kind of standard business hours, also Canyon Country Veterinary Center, located on Soledad Canyon next to the Regal Cinemas. Thanks so much for stopping by. Always wonderful to talk to you. All right, 8:56. We'll be back with traffic after this.